Hello, beautiful homemakers. Today we are continuing with the July chapters of 1,000 Ways to Please a Husband with Bettina's Best Recipes. We're beginning with chapter 15, A Motor Picnic. Hello, Bettina. This is Bob. What are we having for dinner tonight? It's all in the fireless cooker. Why? Couldn't you manage to make a picnic supper of it? One of the men at the office has invited us to go motoring tonight with him and his wife, and of course I said we'd be delighted. They're boarding, poor things, and I asked if we couldn't bring the supper. He seemed glad to have me suggest it. I suppose he hasn't had any home cooking for months. Do you suppose you could manage the lunch? How about it? Why, let me think. How soon must we start? We'll be there in an hour or a little less. Don't bother about it. Get anything you happen to have. It's fine to go, dear. Of course. I'll be ready. Goodbye. Bettina's brain was busy. There was a veal loaf baking in one compartment of the cooker, and on the other side some Boston brown bread was steaming. Her potatoes were cooked already for creaming, and although old potatoes would have been better for the purpose, she might make a salad of them. As she hastily put on some eggs to hard cook, she inspected her icebox. Yes, those cold green beans left from last night's dinner would be good in the salad. What else? It needs something to give it character, she reflected. A little canned pimento, and yes, a few of the pickles in that jar. Of course she had salad dressing. She was never without it. Sandwiches? The brown bread would be too fresh and soft for sandwiches, but she could keep it hot and take some butter along. I'm glad it's cool today. We'll need hot coffee in a thermos bottle, and I can make it a warm supper, except for the salad. She took the veal loaf and the steamed brown bread from the cooker and put them into the oven to finish cooking. How lucky it is that I made those Spanish buns. And the bananas that were to have been sliced for dessert, I can just take along whole. When Bettina heard the auto horn and then Bob's voice, she was putting on her hat. Well, Betty, could you manage it? Yes, indeed, dear. Everything is ready. The thermos bottle has coffee in it, piping hot. The lunch basket over there is packed with the warm things wrapped tight, and that pail with the burlap over it is the temporary icebox. It holds a piece of ice, and beside it is the cream for the coffee and the potato salad. It's cool today, but I thought it best to pack them that way. You are the best little housekeeper in this town, said Bob as he kissed her. I don't believe anyone else could have managed a picnic supper on such short notice. Come on out and meet Mr. and Mrs. Dixon. May I tell them that they have a fine spread coming? Don't you dare, sir. It's a very ordinary kind of a supper, and even you are apt to be disappointed. But he wasn't. Bettina's picnic supper that day consisted of warm veal loaf, cold potato salad, fresh brown bread, butter, Spanish buns, bananas, and hot coffee. Chapter 16. Bettina has a caller. The next morning Bettina was alone in her little kitchen when the doorbell rang. Why, Mrs. Dixon, how do you do? She said as she opened the door and recognized the visitor. Won't you come in? It must be admitted that Bettina was somewhat embarrassed at the unexpected call at so unconventional a time. Mrs. Dixon was dressed in a trim street costume, but under her veil Bettina could see her eyes were red and her lips quivered as she answered. Forgive me for coming so early, but I just had to. I know you'll think me silly to talk to you confidentially when I only met you yesterday, but I do want your advice about something. You mustn't stop what you're doing. Couldn't I come into the kitchen and talk while you work? Why, my dear, of course you can, said Bettina, trying to put her at ease. You can't guess what I was doing. I was washing my pongee dress. Someone told me of such a good way. Why, could you do it all yourself? Said Mrs. Dixon, opening her eyes wide. Why not send it out to be dry cleaned? Oh, of course I might, said Bettina, but that would be expensive. and I do like to save a little money every month from my housekeeping allowance. There are always so many things I want to get. You see, I'm doing this in lukewarm, soapy water, throwing the soap suds up over the goods. Then I'll rinse it well and hang it up in the shade to drip until it gets dry. I won't press it till it's fully dry, because if I do, it would be spotted. How do you learn things like that? Oh, since I've been married, and even before, when I thought about keeping house, I began to pick up all sorts of good ideas. I like economizing. It gives me an opportunity to use all the ingenuity I have. Does it? I always thought it would be awfully tiresome. You see, I've lived in a hotel all my life. My mother never was strong, and I was the only child. I liked it, and since I've been married, we've lived the same way. I never thought of anything else, and I supposed Frank would like it too, but lately, all of last year, he's been begging me to let him find us a house. And then... Bettina saw that her eyes had filled with tears. He has been so different. You have no idea, my dear. Why, he hasn't been at home with me 2 evenings a week, and you must be dreadfully unhappy, interrupted Bettina, wondering what she could say, since she disliked particularly to listen to any account of domestic difficulties. But why not try to keep house? Maybe that would be better. Why, Bob doesn't like to be away from home any evenings at all. But you've just been married, said Mrs. Dixon tactlessly. Wait and see how he'll be after a few years. Well, that's all the more reason for trying to make him like his home. Have you thought of taking a house? That was just the reason I came to you. You seem to be so happy living this way, and it surprised me. I knew last evening what Frank was thinking when he saw this little house. And then when you unpacked the lunch, tell me honestly, did you cook it yourself? Of course, said Bettina, smiling. Wasn't it hard to learn? Why, I can't cook a thing. I can't even make coffee. Frank says if he could only have one breakfast that was fit to eat. And she buried her face in her handkerchief. Why, Mrs. Dixon, cried Bettina cheerfully, though her heart was beating furiously. Your trouble is the easiest one in the world to remedy. Your husband is just hungry, that's all. I'll tell you, we'll make this a little secret between us and have such fun over it. You do just as I tell you for 1 month, and I'll guarantee that Frank will be at home every single minute that he can. Do you suppose I can learn? I'll show you every single thing. We'll slip out this very day and look for a little house to surprise Frank, and I'll teach you to cook by easy stages. Oh, will you? Smiled Mrs. Dixon, showing an adorable dimple in her round cheek. You don't know how much better I feel already. When can we begin? Right now, with coffee. Real sure enough coffee that will make Frank's eyes stick out. Have you a percolator? No, but I can get one. Well, it isn't necessary at all. I'll tell you how to do without it, and then using one will be perfectly simple. Chapter 17. Bob Gets Breakfast on Sunday. Now, Bettina, you sit here and direct me, but don't you dare to move. I'm going to get this breakfast myself. Fine for you, Chef. Have it on the porch, will you? It's the most beautiful morning of the year, I do believe. But you must give me something to do. Let me set the table, will you? Well, you can do that, but get me an apron first. Be sure you get one that'll be becoming. Bettina went to a deep drawer in the pantry, of which a breakfast alcove was a part, and selected a white bungalow apron with red dots. Here, put your arms through this. There, how chic you look. Bob, do you realize that this is our first breakfast on the porch? I must get some of those feathery things growing out there. I want them for the table. We must celebrate. If having flowers on the table is celebrating, you celebrate every day. Of course, my dear. Our married life is just one long celebration. Haven't you discovered that yet? Bettina had thus far no flower garden, but she was never without flowers. The weeds and grasses in her backyard had a way of turning themselves into charming centerpieces, and then, too, red clover was always plentiful. Bob moved the coffee percolator and the electric toaster to the porch and attached them, while Bettina spread the luncheon cloth upon the small table. "Aren't you glad we thought to plan it so that we might have the percolator and toaster out here? That was your idea, wasn't it?" "Aren't you glad you married me?" said Bob enthusiastically. "I'll bet I'm the only man on this street who can frizzle dried beef and cream it and make coffee." "Who taught you to do that, I'd like to know? Give some credit to your wife, who forces you to do it. Here, Bridget, the grapefruit is in the icebox. Did you see it? And the oatmeal in the cooker is waiting to be reheated. Set it in a kettle of water over the fire so that it won't burn. There are rolls in the bread box. Put them in the oven a minute to warm up. If they seem dry, dip them quickly in water before heating them. Now, shall I be making some toast rounds for the chipped beef?" "Well, you might be doing that. I'm getting dizzy with all these orders, ma'am. You can hunt up the cream and the milk and the butter, too, if you will. Now for the beef. Say, but this is going to be a good breakfast. Before the war, I used to sleep late on Sundays, but not any more for me. I like to cook." "There's someone at the door. I'll go. You're busier than I am." There on the doorstep beside the Sunday paper stood a little 4-year-old neighbor, her hands full of old-fashioned pinks. "My mother sent these to you," she said. "Oh, lovely, dear. Thank you. Won't you come in?" "No, ma'am. My daddy has to shine my shoes for Sunday school." "Bob, aren't these pretty with the white feathery weeds? I do love flowers." "They don't look half so pretty as this 'ere frizzled beef does. Breakfast is all ready." Bettina sat down to an open-air breakfast of grapefruit, oatmeal, cream, creamed beef, toast rounds, rolls, butter, and coffee. After a jolly and leisurely meal, Bob announced that he was ready to wash the dishes. "Ever since I've seen that nice white-lined dishpan of yours, I wanted to try it. It's oval, and I never saw an oval one before." "I like it because it fits into the sink so well, and fills all the space it can." "See how efficient I am? I put on the water for the dishes before we sat down to eat. Now I'll have nice hot soapy water and lots of it to rinse them." "But don't rinse the glasses, dear. See how I can polish glass and silver that has just come out of that clean soapy water. Look, isn't that shiny and pretty? There, you can scald everything else." "There's the telephone. It's Mrs. Dixon. What on earth can she want? She asked for you." Bettina talked for a few moments in monosyllables and then returned to the dishes. "What did she have to say?" Bob asked. "She asked me not to tell you, Bob. Nothing much. Perhaps you'll know some day." Bob looked puzzled and slightly hurt. It was the first time that Bettina had kept anything from him, and he could not help showing some displeasure. Bettina saw this and said, "Bob, I don't want to have any secret from you, and I'd like you to know that this is nothing that I wouldn't tell you gladly if I were the only one concerned. I promise, that's all. You'll smile when you know all about it." And Bob was mollified. Chapter 18. Bettina gives a porch party. "I'm so glad you girls have come, for I've been longing to show you the porch ever since Bob and I put on the finishing touches." "Oh, Bettina, it's lovely," cried all the guests in a chorus. "But weren't you awfully extravagant?" "Wait till I tell you. Perhaps I ought not to give myself away, but I am prouder of our little economies than of anything else. We've had such fun over them. This is some old wicker furniture that Mother had in her attic. All but this chair. That came from Aunt Nell's. Bob mended it very carefully and then enameled it this dull green color. I have been busy with these cretonne hangings and cushions for a long time, and we have been coaxing along the flowers in our hanging baskets and our window boxes for days and days, so that they would make a good impression on our first porch guests. Bob made the flower boxes himself and enameled them to go with the furniture. This high wicker flower box was a wedding gift, and so was the wicker reading lamp. This matting rug is new, but I must admit that we bought nothing else except this drop-leaf table, which I have been wanting for a long time. You see, it will make a good serving table, and then we expect to eat on it in warm weather." "What are we to make today, Bettina? The invitation has made us all curious. The porch is cool as can be, so come on Thursday just at 3 to stay a while and sew on something useful, strong, and neat, which with your help will quite complete Bettina's bungalow. What about the little sketches of knives and forks and spoons in the corners? Bob did that. He wrote the verse, too, or I'm afraid I should have telephoned. Are we all here? Wait a minute. And Bettina wheeled out her tea cart, on which, among trailing nasturtiums, were mysterious packages wrapped in fringed green tissue paper. What is in them? Silver cases, cut and ready to be made? Oh, how cunning! Shall we label them, too? What is the card? I'll not encase your silver speech, for that is quite beyond my reach. Did Bob do that, too? The impudence! And Ruth threaded her needle in preparation. You see, said Bettina, I haven't found time to make cases for my silver, so I just decided to let you girls help me. The card tells what to label them in outline stitch in these bright colors. I used to open 10 cases at home before I found what I wanted, so I'm insuring against that. Talk and laughter shortened the afternoon, but at 5 o'clock Bettina wheeled out her tea cart again. The dainty luncheon was decorated with nasturtiums. The girls laid aside their work while Bettina served sunbonnet baby salad, nut bread sandwiches, iced tea, mint wafers, lemon sherbet, and tea cakes. Chapter 19. Bettina and the Expense Budget. Ruth asked me today how we manage our finances, said Bettina over the dinner table. She said that she and Fred were wondering what plan was best. I'm so glad I have a definite household allowance and that we have budgeted our expenses so successfully. The other day I was reading an article by Carolyn Claymore in which she says that 3/4 of the domestic troubles are caused by disagreements about money. Then we haven't much to quarrel about, have we, Betty? That is true in more than one sense, but I'm sure that this way seems to suit us to a T. I'm even saving money, Bob. I don't see how you can when you give me such good things to eat, and when we have so much company. Well, I plan ahead, you know. Plan for my leftovers before they are left. I do think that an instinct for buying and planning is better than an instinct for cooking, and either one could be cultivated. But it was certainly hard to get that budget of expenses fixed satisfactorily, wasn't it? I told Ruth that no two families are alike, and that I couldn't tell her just what they ought to spend for clothes, or just what groceries ought to cost. After all, it's an individual matter which things are necessities and which are luxuries. The chief thing is to live within your means and save as well as invest something, and at the same time be comfortable and happy. I told Ruth we started with the fixed sums and the absolute necessities and worked backward. I told her they must absolutely be saving something, if only a quarter a week. Then that Fred must manage the budget of expenses that comes within his realm and not interfere with hers, and that she must do the same with the household expenditures and not worry him. It takes a lot of adjusting to make the system work satisfactorily, but it's certainly worth it. Did you tell Ruth about the envelope system that my sister Harriet uses? She says she is so careless naturally that when George gives her her allowance each month, she has to put the actual cash in separate envelopes, and then vow to herself that she will not borrow from the gas money to make the change for the grocer boy and so forth. That's the only way she can teach herself. My cousin's wife used to keep the most wonderful and complete accounts, but she couldn't tell without a lot of work in hunting up the items how much she had already spent for groceries or clothes or anything. She had to change her method, and it was she who taught me to keep my accounts in parallel columns, a page for a week, because you give me my allowance each week. I like this way so much, for I can tell at a glance how my expenses are comparing with the allotted sum. I like to look at your funny, neat little notebook, Bettina. all ruled so carefully for the week, and the headings such as gas, electricity, groceries, meat, milk, laundry across the top. Don't make fun of my notebook. I couldn't keep house without it. In case of fire, I'd save it first of all, I know. It's almost like a diary to me. I can look back over it and remember that was the day Bob brought Mr. Green home and we almost ran out of potatoes. Or, this was the day I thought my brown bread had failed, but Bob seemed to like it. She exaggerated. Failures in cooking. Why, Bettina, I don't know the meaning of the words. And I don't see how you can feed me so well on the sum I give you for the purpose. I'd feel guilty, only you don't look a bit unhappy or overworked. I should say not. You surely don't remember how to cook all the things you give me. No, indeed, Bob, not definitely, that is. You see, on the shelf by my account book, which you smile over, I have my card index, with lots and lots of recipes filed away. Then I have notebooks, too, with all sorts of suggestions tucked in them, just where I can lay my hand on them. Betty, dear, you've given me a real glimpse into your business-like methods. Some men seem to think that it doesn't take much brains to run a house well, but they don't know. It requires just as much executive ability and common sense as it does to manage a big business. That night the dinner for two consisted of cold ham, green peppers stuffed with rice, light rolls, peach butter, and hot fudge cake. Chapter 20. Mrs. Dixon and Bettina's Experiment. "I'm so happy," said Mrs. Dixon, as she stopped at Bettina's door one cool morning. "But I'm nervous, too. What if Frank shouldn't like it?" "Oh, but he will," Bettina assured her. "He'll think he's the luckiest man in town, and I almost believe that he is. He'll love that dear little white house with the screened porch. Why, the very grass looks as if it longed to spell welcome, like some of the doormats I've seen. And think of the flower boxes. You were very fortunate to rent it for a year, furnished so nicely. And probably when that time is up you'll be ready to build or buy one of your own. You're a dear to cheer me up this way, but I'm nervous in spite of you. Perhaps I should have consulted Frank before I promised to take the house. But he's been urging you to keep house for so long, and I know he'll be grateful to you for sparing him the worry of hunting one himself. Besides, he'll like being surprised. Well, I'll go back to the hotel for luncheon with him, and then I'll phone him later to meet me at the house. I won't tell him a thing. I'll just give him the address. I'll say it's very, very important. That will surprise him, and perhaps will frighten him a little. He never does leave his office during business hours, but it will take only a few minutes for him to run out here in the car. Goodness, I'm forgetting what I came for. Do you suppose I'm too stupid to try to make those Spanish buns Frank liked so much? We had them at the picnic, you know. I have 3 hours after luncheon until he comes, and I just long to give him some good coffee and some Spanish buns that I've made myself. That little kitchen looks as if it would be so nice to work in. I tried coffee a little while ago over at the house, and really, it was fine. It looked just like yours. I was so surprised to think of my doing such things. Of course you could make Spanish buns. It would be fine if you would. I'll tell you. Why not let me come over for an hour right after luncheon and superintend? Then I'll slip home so that you can be alone when Frank comes. I could tell you some other things about cooking while we're there together. Things you may want to write down in your new notebook. For example, I've often wondered that so few housekeepers can make good white sauce. What in the world is that? It's used in cream soups, and it's the cream part of the creamed vegetables and meat and fish. And then there is a thicker white sauce that is used to bind croquettes. That is, hold the ingredients together. There are really 4 kinds of white sauces, and they are all very simple to make. I think everyone should know the right way to make them, for they are useful in preparing so many good things. I'm glad we'll be near you because I can ask you so many questions. And I'm glad that it's summer because you can have so many things that require little or no cooking, and by fall I'm sure you'll be an accomplished housekeeper. Will you come over at 2 then, or earlier if you can? Of course I will. And as Mrs. Dixon hurried away, Bettina felt a sympathetic thrill at the happiness 2 other people were about to find. Chapter 21. A Rainy Day Dinner. The rain had been falling all day in a heavy downpour, and Bettina had ventured out only to gather some red clover blooms for the porch table, which she was now setting for dinner. In spite of the rain, it wasn't cold, and she liked the contrast of the cheerful little table with its white cloth and bright silver, and the gray day just outside the screen. If Bob would only come home early, how nice it would be, she thought. Perhaps that's he at the telephone now. However, it proved to be Mrs. Dixon. I phoned to ask you if I should throw away the yolks of 2 eggs. I've just used the whites. Oh, no, Mrs. Dixon. Beat them up well, and add a little cold water to them, then set them in the icebox. They'll be just as good later as they would be now. You may want to use them for salad dressing or something else. If I ever have the white of an egg left, should I treat that the same way? No, don't beat that up at all, nor add any water. Just set it in the refrigerator as it is. I'm so glad you called up, Mrs. Dixon. Will you and your husband take dinner with us next Sunday? Perhaps we might all go to church first. We'd love to do that. I've just been worrying over Sunday dinner, and you've restored my peace of mind. But won't it be a great deal of work for you? I won't let it be. I don't believe in those heavy, elaborate Sunday dinners that take all morning to prepare. We'll just come home from church and have it in half an hour. You may help me. We'd love to come. I have so much to tell you. I've been very busy, but Frank has helped, and it's been such fun. You don't know how he enjoys the little house. Well, goodbye until tomorrow. Boo! Shouted Bob in her ear as she hung up the receiver. I discovered your dark secret this morning. Frank Dixon told me. Well, what did you think of it? The only possible solution in that case. You are their good angel. That is, if she doesn't poison Frank with her cooking or burn down the house while she's lighting the fire. She won't, don't worry. She takes to housekeeping as if she had always done it. Her house is immaculate. She has been cleaning and dusting and polishing from morning to night. I'm almost ashamed of mine. I'm not, said Bob decidedly. I don't see how you can keep it clean at all, with a man like me scattering papers and cigar ashes everywhere. And I'm always losing my belongings, and always will, I suppose. That's only a sign that we haven't discovered the proper place for them all yet. But we'll work it out in time. Well, are you hungry? Hungry? I should say so. Why, I could almost eat you. Well, Bob, we have a rainy day dinner tonight that I hope you'll enjoy. Hash. Does that frighten you? Not your hash, Betty. Well, everything is ready. The rainy evening menu consisted of browned hash, creamed cauliflower, date muffins, butter, applesauce cake, and chocolate. This ends part 2 of 3.